Live on YouTube now, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. Members, you are by now aware of the need to keep your video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep your microphone muted, except when I invite you to speak. Please click the raised hand function if you wish to ask a question or comment. There is always a risk that we may run into technical problems, and I would ask for your patience if we do. Should this occur, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed, and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. Can I remind members and officers that all virtual meetings will be recorded and that these recordings will be published on the Council's website. I'm now going to move on to attendance. Members, I will begin by calling the names of all members of the committee. To establish your attendance, please confirm your presence. Councillor Anna Bailey.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Ian Bates.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Simon Bywater.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Criswell.
Present.
Councillor Lorna Dupre.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Derek Giles. I don't believe Councillor Derek Giles is with us at the moment. I will recheck when I get re-ask his name at the end. Councillor Mark Goldsack.
Present.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Roger Hickford.
Present.
Councillor Peter Hudson.
Present.
Councillor David Jenkins.
Present.
Councillor Noel Kavanagh.
Present. Yeah.
Councillor Peter MacDonald.
Present.
Councillor Eliza Machini.
Present.
Councillor Lucy Netzinger.
Present.
Councillor Tom Sanderson.
Present.
Councillor Josh Schumann.
Present.
Myself, Councillor Steve Count. Here. I'm just going to recheck Councillor Derek Giles. Okay, Derek isn't with us at the moment. We haven't heard from him. Should he join us during the meeting, Democratic Services will be asked to record that. Do Democratic Services Manager have any apologies for absence? I believe we're all here.
No, Chairman, I don't.
Okay, thank you. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? I'm seeing no hands, so there's nothing to record, so I shall move on. Agenda item 2, minutes of the meeting on 14th July 2020. We're being asked to approve the minutes as a correct record. Can I ask any member who does not agree with the proposal to click the raised hand function on the right of your screen now? I have Councillor David Jenkins indicating he wishes to speak. David.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's not specifically about the minutes, but I wasn't sure when I should raise this. It's about the agenda. And I noticed we don't have a COVID item on the agenda at this meeting, which surprised me. And I wondered whether that will now be reinstated. And even so, what can I do at this meeting to ask a question regarding COVID response?
Okay. Could I ask Democratic Services or Gillian to respond on where the coronavirus papers are and the proposals for that, and whether there's an appropriate juncture for Councillor David Jenkins to raise a question on the subject?
Chairman, I think Amanda may wish to add, but I think all the COVID reports are now contained within the finance reports, which are included on your agenda. So when we get to the integrated finance report, that's the appropriate place to ask the question.
Okay, thank you very much. So as you'll see, David, from the papers, it's very comprehensively in there as part of the integrated report. So at that point in time, you would like to ask your question then. Thank you. Moving on then, I have no other hands indicated regarding the minutes, so we will take that as a carried. We'll have that electronically signed as appropriate. I'll sign a hard copy when we return to the offices. An updated action log has been included in the published papers for this meeting. All the actions, except for the ones on page 7, are marked as complete. Members will have received an email on the 14th September in relation to the issue of malnutrition at the top of page 7, so that action is now complete. Amanda, can you update the committee on action 258 when we get to item 5 on the agenda, please? If any members have questions on the action log, except for 258, would they use the raised hand function on the right of their screen now to show this? And on action 258, if they could wait until we get the update on agenda item number 5. I have a hand indicated from council. The hand has been taken down. Do I have anybody that wishes to speak? I'm seeing none. No members have indicated they wish to speak, so we'll take the action log as noted. Agenda item number 3, we have received no public questions or petitions, so we will move to the next item of business. Can I invite the Head of Finance to introduce the report, agenda item number 4, and then I'll invite the Director of Community and Safety to introduce Appendix 4 of the report, which is the Integrated Finance Monitoring Report for the period ending the 31st of July. Is that over to you, Tom?
Yep, thank you, Chairman. So taking recommendations A to G, first of all, and the committee's attention to page 10 of the report. This records that the current revenue forecast for the year is a pressure of 0.1 million, but we are also reporting 0.8 million increased use of the coronavirus grant to manage that position in year, given the pressures the council is facing. There's no change in year for the capital forecast. On that page, the committee will also note that there are decreases in the numbers of older people supported, quite significant decreases in bed-based care at nursing and residential homes, and that's consistent with the NHS support arrangements that are in place at the moment and have been through the summer due to the pandemic. Page 13 looks exclusively at the council's financial position from the perspective of the consequences of the pandemic. You'll see that on this page we show a projected additional costs and lost income to the council of 57 million. These estimates include the full forecast that we have above, but also include a more speculative estimate of the impact on the second part of the year, and in particular the impact on adult services from moving forward. Taking account of all of the funding we receive, we anticipate there'll be a £5.5 million unfunded gap on that position as a result of the pandemic. That table on page 13 also shows the position on impaired savings, and the committee will note that the tracker is attached to this report, and savings tracker. Looking at the recommendations, as you say, Chairman, we'll deal with recommendation H separately to be introduced by Adrian Chapman. But F and G are the revenue recommendations relating to monies received for the pandemic, and A to E relate to capital. I think B, C, D and E are all fairly straightforward capital changes, just updating the budget where there are changes in funding impacting the council. It may just be worth giving some further explanation on recommendation A around the capital variations budget. This is a change the council made a number of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago now, which has been quite successful in our capital budgeting, to recognise that the nature of capital schemes is that there will always be some slippage. On a formulaic basis, we calculate what that anticipated slippage is across the scheme, and that's referred to as the capital variations budget. What we've seen in previous reports is that the capital budget has been revised, and formulaically that then has an impact on the level of variations we'd expect So the recommendation A just confirms that increase in the capital variations budget as a result of that formula. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Tom. Okay, I now invite members to ask questions of the report, or should I ask whether we should cover the other part? But can I ask the questions on this part of the report first? Councillor Dupre. Councillor Dupre, yeah, sorry. I've just scrolled to the top of the screen. Apologies, Councillor Dupre. Councillor Machine was first.
No worries. I just had two questions, which are basically just for my my trying to understand these things a little bit better. I mean, first of all, I mean, I think this is probably one of the clearest financial papers we've had this year. This is not to say anything bad about anything that came before, but I'm glad that, you know, we're starting to see a little bit of clarity about the funding, etc. So, you know, thank you, Tom. This is very useful. Number one, I mean, you touched on it briefly. See, I lost my point now. So in point, because I'm looking at it on the screen, I have no idea what page it is, but in point 2.2, we mentioned the year-end pressure of £100,000, 0.1 million, which is a result of effectively the, I'm presuming, is the increased pressure on the various budget and balanced by the underspend. So then in section, whereabouts are we? I'm so sorry, the scrolling thing doesn't work very well. In section 3.1.2, we then mentioned the 5.5 million overall deficit. I was just wondering if you could make it more clear, the relationship between the two, and whether or not we actually expect a deficit of 5 million at the end of the year, or if we have any plans, if we expect anything to come to plug that. So that's my first question. My second question, with regard to the changes in phasing, I was just wondering whether, because you touched on it, but I was just wondering whether you could give us a bit more detail about what that actually means in terms of where exactly this money is coming from. Hopefully that doesn't sound too silly, but that's what I was wondering.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Machini. I'm going to invite Tom in one moment to give you a fuller response, but I'll just briefly skirt over the tops of it. The relationship between the two figures of £0.1 million overspend and £5.6 million overspend, there isn't a direct relationship. It's two different ways of looking at the picture that surrounds us and trying to predict where we're going to be. Now, if we go back a few months, the difference was about £12 million, and it was indicated then that we should see a narrowing of these two figures as we go through the year. But it's two different ways of looking at the same picture, and therefore it's that the major point to draw out of this is just the difficulty we're going to have this year in landing on a definitive figure. And this is two different ways of getting for it. And of course, the one thing I want to bring out is this report is to the end of 31st July. And so it was therefore written a few weeks after that, or started writing after that. The world has changed somewhat since the 31st of July. So even though our budgets of what we've achieved so far may not be that different, the way we're going to predict and the way that we're seeing the impact of the various measures going on nationally may well change the way that we think about it. We've got announcements yesterday that are affecting things. We've got further announcements today. So it's very unstable set of predictions at the moment, but it's the best we can do. I will let Tom explain the exact differences between the two different ways. The phasing, the second question, relates to say a building project, a capital project, where the actual period of the build and the predictions of the use of the money during the period of the build transfers from one period into another. So it's mainly not to do with changing the programs, it's when the money's being spent. So the money was already there and it's moved from 1 month or 1 year into another, in this case year. So I'll just hand over to Tom to give some greater depth of detail on it, but I hope that was helpful, Tom.
Thank you. And in fact, I haven't got too much to add to that as the in terms of the big picture, except to reinforce that it is difficult circumstances in which to forecast at the moment. There are a few illustrations on page 14 of the differences between those two forecasting methods. So for adult services, in the method where we've got a higher figure, we have included a longer term impact on adults over this winter. For children's services, on the first method, we're actually seeing very stable or slightly decreasing demand, whereas we anticipate there will actually be increases in demand in the back half of the year, but we're not seeing anything directly in the forecast yet to back that up. And then there are some financing differences between the two methods. So counting some costs that can be redistributed internally, so won't come through to the forecast. As the chairman suggests, we do expect those two, the two methods to narrow further as they have already. And then on the phasing point, so 6.6 in the report, which is around page 23, gives some further details. So some of the capital recommendations are around where we're receiving or have negotiated different contributions to capital programs. And then taking a phasing example, the education scheme has rolled forward funding for Abington Woods, which is purchase of a facility for special educational needs. The committee had agreed a budget for that purchase. It was expected to go through last year, but actually the purchase didn't happen until this financial year. So all the recommendation does is move that capital budget forward from 1 year to the next, which is why I say they're all quite straightforward really, and don't where they relate to phasing, they don't commit the council to any additional expenditure.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Lorna Dupre.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is about the point that Tom already alluded to about the adult services and fewer people receiving social care compared to the spring. I wondered whether Tom could explain a little bit more about the financial drivers of that. Presumably, and sadly and bluntly, some of that will be down to mortality. Is some of that down to people awaiting assessments and placements because of COVID that will result in expenditure further down the line once that's all back on track? Some of it, I'm assuming, is a move, I think that's already says in the report, sort of and in Tom's gloss, a move from care home placements to domiciliary care. Do we know what the proportion is of those various elements and any others that may be driving the finance of this? And therefore, what we can expect in the near future as some of those things, such as any delayed assessments, kind of come back up to speed. And I appreciate it's very difficult to, well, it's impossible to predict in rapidly moving circumstances, but I wondered if Tom had any more explanation of the various elements that are driving the finance of that he could explain. That's my first question. And the second question is on 5.2 at the bottom of page 31, which is talking about the additional £541,000 funding for supporting emergency assistance for food and essential supplies. The last sentence of that paragraph says, additionally, some funds are allocated on a district by district basis to enable response to further needs. I wasn't sure whether the additionally meant additionally to the £541,000, and if so, where that was coming from and how much it was. If it's part of the £541,000, then how much of the £541,000 is it? And how is the decision made on that allocation district by district? Thank you.
Bear with me, please. Thank you, Councillor Dupre. I see Councillor Anna Bailey's indicated to speak, and as chair of the Adults Committee, I wonder if it was in response to your first question. So I'm going to invite Councillor Bailey to respond. If it's not, just let me know.
More of a general comment on the sort of state of play in adults. We have had recent announcements of further infection control funding from central government, which is extremely welcome. Didn't make it into this report, and that is incredibly helpful because obviously we as a council took a decision to make the 10% resilience payment up until the end of June, and then we had further government funding, but obviously the infection control measures aren't going away anytime soon, so that is a real increased cost, so that's really welcome. We are seeing now increasing demand on services. So, you know, I think carers have done a huge amount of work during the lockdown period and are exhausted, and people coming out the other end of that, you know, there are increasing demands and people have not sought help as early as they might have done previously, which does mean that perhaps demands are greater than they might have otherwise been. And to try and quantify that into the future is very, very difficult at the moment. And I think, you know, we are going, you know, one of our huge focuses of work is to do everything that we can to support carers. And that's not about what we've done in the past, which is giving them small amounts of money to do very small things. It's much more about emotional support and putting them in touch with the right organisations to help them get support. And giving them access to, you know, emergency respite care so that it's there when they need it, when they really are falling over. So we're very focused on that. The biggest issue that we've got is around our impaired savings and the Adults Positive Challenge programme, which is where our work is focused in that area. And it's not essentially Adults Positive Challenge really isn't about savings. It's about moving the shift towards prevention. And in year one, Adults Positive Challenge delivered everything that it said it would do. Inevitably, that's been somewhat impaired during the COVID pandemic. You know, when you're trying to move focuses and your service and your emphasis and your shift into prevention, a pandemic hits and inevitably things have to be done very quickly, which means, you know, prevention does require high quality conversations with people. And looking at their other networks of support and community organisations, and that's not been easily come by during the pandemic. So the tech work stream on putting technology into people's homes has suffered, and the reablement work stream. But actually, I think now there is a huge focus on those again and tech, and I think, you know, they will start to deliver again, and we will see those savings come through. And there is an emphasis on the recovery plan around some of that. But I think all of this shouts to why the next item that we're going to talk about, recommendation H, the transformation bid from communities and partnership, is so incredibly important, which is about that localisation of services and using all of the good things that have come out of the pandemic around the volunteer effort and volunteer support, and getting people plugged into their local communities and other organisations that can help. And I think that's why and I will hopefully just say a few words on it when we get to it. That's really just a bit of perspective I wanted to add from my point of view.
Thank you very much for that, Anna. It's very, very useful. Tom, can you add anything to the two questions from Councillor Dupre?
Thank you. Well, I can't add very much at all to what Councillor Bailey suggested, or the questions that Councillor Dupre raises on the first point, except to confirm that you know, there is an impact of increased mortality. That trend towards increased domiciliary care is very much there. We're not really picking up through the financial forecasts an impact from longer waiting lists, and that kind of longer range forecast, as we'll see actually in the next GPC when we start to look at the first numbers from business planning for next year. We are modelling an impact of kind of I think it's called deconditioning, or kind of the decline of people's well-being and health during this period, which we expect to lead to some kind of pent-up demand really on adult services going forward. The other major factor, I mentioned it in the introduction, is the level of NHS funding at the moment, and how that is quite different from the normal setup of there being NHS funding for a number of weeks when people leave care, and how that situation unwinds, and what the successor guidance is to NHS and local government as we work together could be quite financially consequential for the council. So that's a major risk financially. On the second point, the district by district allocations, they are within the 540k. I think I'm right in saying that it's at high level, that's been allocated at 35k per district, which would be 175k overall, I think. But there is some flexibility that colleagues in the Communities Directorate are handling to manage that best allocation as we go forward in the next few weeks.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. Okay, moving on now, I've got Councillor Lucy Netzinger indicating she wants to speak. Lucy?
Thank you. My question really is in response to what you were saying at the start, Chairman, about the uncertainty of the financial situation. I think we all understand just how difficult any kind of forecasting is at the moment. And I'm just aware that we're moving into the budget setting period in the autumn this year, and all of the committees are likely to be having to try and work out how to set budgets for next year. I believe that we were expecting an autumn statement from the Chancellor with a 4-year settlement. I wondered whether either you, Chairman, or the finance team have got any indication about whether that settlement is likely to be 4 years, or whether it's likely to be yet another 1-year rollover, and whether we have any indication. I know that there are serious concerns about falling income coming into the council. I don't know whether we have any awareness of whether government are likely to be taking that into account in the settlement this year, because it will be tremendously important for us as we move into that autumn budget cycle.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Netzinger. So what I heard and understand, I think like me, you'd agree that the government's doing a fantastic job with the finances in what has been an incredibly difficult time. You know, they've
no, I wouldn't agree with that, Steve.
You wouldn't? Okay, well, anyway, from my point of view, and I'm sure the majority of the committee then would agree with me, that the government has done a fantastic job in dealing with the financial consequences of what is an incredibly complex situation. What we do know at the moment is the government, just like ourselves, have difficulty in predicting where this will all end up, where this will finalise, and the damage being done along the way, depending on the various measures they take. So they had planned a 4-year settlement. There are some indications coming out. This is neither confirmed nor factual. This is just some indications and some grapevine stuff that it might be another 1-year settlement. Now, under normal circumstances, I would say, my God, can't you give us a 4-year settlement so that we can plan for the future? However, considering the rapidly changing nature of the situation, if we look at this prediction in July compared to this prediction now, it may be better for all of us that a 1-year settlement, and that may even be flexed during the year as it has been this year. If you take this year's settlement and the figures that we've got in the table, you know, we've had over £50 million worth of extra expenditure, and somewhere approaching that in terms of grants. So our budget this year does not resemble the budget that we set in February by a long way. And I think whilst coronavirus rides its roller coaster rides of ups and downs and outbreaks and not, it may be that we have to keep a flexible budget, both at national level and at local level, local government level. So I can't confirm that it's going to be a 1-year settlement, but I have heard stuff on the grapevine. I've got Chris Malyon indicating to speak. He's plugged into society, the County Society of National Treasurers. So I wonder if he's got anything to add into that. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, it's just to reconfirm what you said, really, because all the narrative that we're getting is it will be a 1-year settlement, and for the reasons that you've highlighted. The reason for putting my hand up is Tom and I have a meeting with the MHCOG next Thursday, they've invited us to come and virtually speak with them. So we're hoping to clarify a number of the points that we've discussed during today's meeting with them, and particularly around the impact on the council's finances is in relation to the local taxation system for next year. And just to reinforce that, the things I've said previously, I think we, albeit the things are looking slightly more pessimistic for the current year, the big challenge is actually the next financial year, and some of that will come out in the business planning reports that you're seeing in front of the committee during the next cycle. So that's the real challenge, and we hope to get some sort of commitment or confirmation from the department about how the process will work from here through to the end of the financial year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much for that, Chris. Okay, Lucy? Yeah. I've got Councillor Bailey indicating to speak again. Anna?
Sorry, I just wanted to support what you were saying, Councillor Count, about the support from central government, because as leader of a district council, and obviously, with my head in adult social care at the county council, it's been a matter of supreme importance. And I've attended many sessions with government ministers and civil servants, and I can report that they have listened incredibly carefully to everything that we've been saying to them. They've reacted in terms of detail around the needs of district councils and the county council, and they've reacted quickly, and they've been incredibly responsive and comprehensive in the way that they've reacted. Yes, we could always do with more, but I've just been talking about the fact that there's more infection control money coming. And what I have found is that every single time we have made a case and we've provided the evidence and the specifics around that case, government has responded and responded positively and comprehensively. And I think it's important to recognise that, because we need central government support going forward. And we have huge challenges going into the next financial year. And it's important that we recognise what's been done so far by central government, which is an incredibly good job on the finances for local government.
Thank you very much, Anna. I've got no more hands indicating to speak at this stage, so I'm going to invite, is it Adrian Chapman or Amanda Askham that's going to speak to the remaining item?
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's me. So thank you very much, and good morning, members. Good to see you all. So I'm just going to briefly introduce Appendix 4 in your pack, which is on page 32. And this is a Transformation Fund bid request to support the creation of a formal Think Communities service. And I just want to set the context, really, much of which actually committee have been discussing this morning, but important to think about life before the pandemic as well. And this council has a strong track record in supporting community work, the creation of the community champion in Councillor Criswell's role, the formation of the committee probably 3 years ago, getting on for 3 years ago now, and examples of work such as support for parish and town councils, the Innovate and Cultivate Fund, and the more recent £5 million capital fund, which has now been fully expended. Some really good examples of a strong commitment, I think, to putting communities first. And then more recently, the very successful Neighbourhood Cares pilots in St Ives and in Soham, both very different, but the much discussed evaluation report from those pilots showed the value, as Councillor Bailey has already articulated, of a place-based, localised approach to supporting vulnerable people. And that's very much something that's inspired the work we've been doing on Think Communities. And then thirdly, the pandemic itself has really required us to step up at pace, as with all other departments and indeed public sector partners, to respond to supporting communities and many thousands of vulnerable people. So some significant context that's led to the point today where we're bringing forward this request for not an insignificant amount of investment to seize the moment and to capitalise on the work that we've been doing. I think during the pandemic, if I can talk about that a little bit more now, what we've seen is the best of our communities, and in many cases, communities and volunteers, parish councils and others have stepped up and stepped into spaces without any intervention whatsoever from the local public sector, and that's right and proper. This proposal is not in any way to meddle, frankly, in that kind of approach. That what we've seen is communities that have just stepped into need or into a demand that they've spotted within their local community, sometimes at street level, sometimes at village or parish level, sometimes at ward level, but have done an exceptional job to keep people safe, to provide very practical support to people who are otherwise vulnerable or isolated. And this proposal is not to replace or meddle or interfere with that kind of approach. Rather, what it's done, the pandemic has done, I think, is shine a light on some of the other issues that are out there, and many of which you've been discussing this morning, the financial and demand pressures on services, which at the moment we've heard are different to what we would normally expect to see, and we await, as Tom was describing, the full impact and effect of the pandemic on services such as adults and children's. The vulnerabilities, the sheer volume of people who are vulnerable in our community, I think 32,000 in total who are shielding. If shielding is reintroduced, we expect that number to be greater. Not that we know that it will be yet, but if it is, we expect that number to be greater. But many, many, many more thousands of people who were not necessarily shielding, but were otherwise concerned, anxious, vulnerable, people in their 70s or older, pregnant women, all of whom were strongly advised to look after themselves more so than ever. And then also, I think what the pandemic has done is shine a light on some of the inequalities that we face as a county. Again, well-rehearsed differences in parts of our county in terms of employment opportunity, opportunities for learning, opportunities for self-development, access to services, and so on, impacted through all sorts of reasons. But the pandemic has really exemplified the inequalities agenda even further. So many, many more people now who were just about coping before, now really struggling to get by as a result of perhaps losing their job or for other consequences. So for various reasons, that context is designed really to provide you with some background. The proposal that's before you is to really seize the moment and to commit more formally to the work that we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years, and again, particularly as a result of the pandemic, and create a Think Communities service, which would be place-based and people-centred. So there would be a resource allocated district by district, but led by the county council, but working very closely with partners in each of the district areas, and then drilling those services down to a much more localised level, so that shared decision making can take place, shared data sharing can take place. We can look at alternative service delivery arrangements. So we always talk about domiciliary care as a good example of how the model currently is model A, but could model B be something more localised? Could it be that domiciliary care is provided by groups or organisations that are born out of local commitment to supporting residents and neighbours, very much in the ilk of the pandemic. And actually, I would say we've probably got the best relationship with our partners now as a consequence of the pandemic. There are so few positives that have come out of the last unimaginable 6 months, but I think some of the positives are in relation to the way that the public sector system is now working together really effectively. And there's a lot more to do on that, but we think now is the time to seize that opportunity and to really commit to a place-based approach with our partners that's going to see a more localised model of delivery. As I would expect, obviously, with any investment of this size, committee will no doubt be anxious to see how that investment will yield a return to the council. And I think, again, as Councillor Bailey was mentioning, preventative work, which is what has to be our sole focus right now, and is always so difficult to evidence. But we have taken a lot of learning and inspiration from the way that the Adults Positive Challenge tracks savings, and intend to replicate a similar tool where we identify individuals, households, families, and whole communities who need support in some way through the Think Communities approach, and track progress that will then identify costs avoided as a consequence of this investment, and we're seeking an investment to March 2022, so intend to use that period to prove the concept of cost avoidance. And cost avoidance in this context could come from providing alternatives to statutory interventions. This is not about reducing or rather increasing thresholds. It's not about making it harder to get to services. It's about offering alternatives where alternatives might be more appropriate or deliver a more sustainable solution. Cost avoidance might come in the application of opportunity for people, so a better skills offer for people to get themselves into employment, back into employment, or into better paid employment. Preventing and delaying access to services is really important. We all know how hard it is sometimes to come out of a statutory service once you're in that statutory service. Once you're in hospital, it's notoriously more difficult to resettle back at home. Once you're an offender in prison, it's much more difficult to take a different path in life once you've been subjected to that kind of environment. So the idea of delaying or preventing at least the access to those statutory interventions is a core component. And the initial areas of focus are described in the circles diagram that you can see on page 35. This shows 8 initial priorities, areas of significant demand for this council, areas of significant concern across all ages, across all types of person, resident, individual, community. This will be extended slightly further to also include priorities from other directorates. So I would expect to see something in there for the Think Community Service to focus on around climate change, for example, or to further support the public health agenda. Or economic recovery, things that perhaps traditionally fall outside of the pure description of a community service, but nevertheless require communities to completely commit and sign up to those kinds of approaches. So our initial priorities are those described on page 35, but that's not intended in any way to be rigid. So as recommendation H describes, this is a transformation fund bid for just short of £1.7 million to take us to March 2022. The intention will be that we prove this concept financially in that period, such is our confidence, and that from that point, the consequential costs avoided or saved will be used to support this service as a mainstream service beyond that date. Thank you, Chairman. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Just before I move over to more general comments from members of the committee, I think it's an apt moment just for me on behalf of, I believe, everybody in the committee, to pass on my thanks yet again to all our officers, the volunteers, the communities out there in trying to assist us through this terrible, terrible situation. And I think we in Cambridgeshire have been doing a cracking job, and I'm not talking about we involving me, I'm talking about the people out there at every level, the officers, the volunteers, the members of the community, the family members, the friends, the streets, the parishes, the towns. We're all in this together. And I think sometimes we see on the news every day the despair that we have that we've got to give up some of our freedoms to try and manage the situation. But actually, when you look at what people have given up with a smile on their face and accepted willingly that we're all in this together, I feel incredibly proud and be lucky to be a resident of Cambridgeshire and to see how people have responded. And a personal thanks on behalf of the committee and through myself to the members of staff once again, because unfortunately, there's no easy way to say it, but the way it's going at the moment, we're going to have to ask everybody to run at 100 miles per hour yet again as the second wave comes forward. You know, we've been through an incredibly tense period since the start. I myself managed to have a little break just recently, which was the first break since the start of this pandemic. And I hope other people like me have had an opportunity to recharge their batteries somewhat, because it has been draining for all of us. But when you come back and you find that we're all in this together, it is very refreshing to know that we're all doing our best. You mentioned a moment ago the way that the public sector is working better now. Adversity in crisis brings out the best in all of us. And there's a lot of that we want to capture and make permanent, even when we come out the other end. So I'm glad that that's moving in the right direction. And I've also heard, not just at the district and parish level, but also our relationship with the NHS, which is such an important player in this, is so much improved during this crisis that we need to capture a lot of this and bring this out at the far end when we do recover from this crisis. So thank you all. We're going to move back to the actual agenda item, the paper now, but please accept the thanks of everybody. Councillor Steve Criswell, very much at the heart of this, if you want to come up first, Steve.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Adrian hasn't left me much to say, really, because it's a very comprehensive report. This goes to the very heart of the Communities and Partnerships Committee's work. And I'd like to personally thank Adrian for all the work he's done in this regard. So no surprises, Chairman, I fully support this proposal. It ensures that our place-based working model that's been developed through the Communities and Partnerships Committee is effectively grounded within communities, and that we're able to work more effectively with our partners. And as Adrian has mentioned, it will build on that relationship, which has certainly improved and developed during the pandemic. I think our engagement with the communities will be improved, as will our ability to reduce the need and improve outcomes for our residents. So in a nutshell, Chairman, I think this is good news. It's a big step forward for us in the way we deliver services, and I'll be fully supporting this recommendation for this transformation bid, Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. Well said. Councillor Peter MacDonald.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just a clarification for me, asking Adrian for the community connectors. Adrian, that's obviously the bulk of the expenditure. What are the key measures for them? What are the key deliverables over this period? It seems that the plan overall looks a good one, and well done for putting it together. Just want to understand how they're measured and what they should deliver.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Yes, absolutely. That is the most significant part of the investment. And we've had the benefit of having similar roles through redeployment largely over the last 6 months. So staff that are county council staff, but very much co-located with partners within each district council area. And they've been instrumental in joining up the pieces, in just making sure that the wheels are oiled, that the relationships are working, that people are getting access to the right information, people being our partners largely, but also communities. But also what we've seen more recently is a nuancing of their role. So a much more localized approach to what's happening. So a community connector led or supported piece of work in Fenland, particularly around supporting people who are newly out of work, compared to something in Cambridge City, which is around supporting the City Council with the fantastic work they already do on food poverty and poverty generally. So it's that kind of the glue, if you like, that's going to stick the pieces together in a district council environment. They will be held to account. This isn't just about sitting alongside partners in a district council area and talking about stuff and not seeing any tangible outcomes. It's really fundamental that this group of 10 officers, and there'll be a pro rata equivalent in Peterborough, funded through Peterborough City Council, I should say, will own the responsibility for delivering the cost avoidance that's been articulated. But they'll do that in a way which gives them oversight of the whole set of data that currently perhaps we don't have access to. So comparing our data with district council data or NHS data or police data, and those officers holding the ring on that data to truly understand what's driving the cost, what's driving the pressure, what could we do differently that could deliver a better financial outcome, but also, as Councillor Criswell said, better quality of life related outcome. So really quite fundamental and absolutely right to pick up on that, I think, as a significant part of the investment.
Thank you, Adrian. Okay, Peter. All right. Councillor Lorna Dupre.
Thank you, Chairman. I think one of the things that the pandemic has exposed is, well, actually two things that the pandemic has exposed is firstly, the inequalities between different parts of the county as well as different parts of the country, and also the extreme vulnerability of many sectors of the economy that we have taken for granted. And I think the other one of the other things it has also exposed, and Adrian Chapman mentioned this, which is a positive, is that huge potential for community mutual support. If people see that there is a purpose to it, and if people perceive that there is a way in which they can help and make a difference to their neighbours, their communities, there are thousands of people, and we have seen them coming out and making that difference, and that is just such good news. And I think this paper is absolutely right in seeking to build on that, and it's clearly unsustainable for the county council to do that on the basis that it did during COVID wave 1, of lots of secondments of people from all kinds of departments who did a fantastic job, no doubt about it. They were incredible. But at the same time, that's not a sustainable way for the organisation to work. So therefore, I think it's right that we seek to put that support on a more sustainable footing, facing what we're going to face, not just in health terms with COVID wave 2 and maybe beyond, who knows, but also the financial and other outfalls of COVID. My worry with, and I'm going to support this paper, so I want to say that straight up, but my worry about it is that it seems to be that the Transformation Fund bidding process seems to be a bit of a Procrustean bed for this application. That, you know, if you're too, for those who don't know their Greek mythology, if you're too big for the bed, you basically have bits chopped off until you fit. And there is a feeling that this bid is actually trying to fit into a framework that it's not meant for. It's not meant for it because there isn't that payback calculation that you can do, and the paper admits that. And there isn't also in this document that analysis of risk, which worries me a little bit, that we're committing a large amount of money to this, rightly so, without analysing the risk and saying actually that list of risks will follow afterwards. I would have preferred to have seen that beforehand, and I don't think it would have been impossible to have done that. But I think that the structure of this process is wrong. It's a good thing to do, and I'm supporting it because it's a good thing to do. But I don't think the transformation bid process is the right way to do it. And I just sound a bit of a note for the future that while transformation may be the flavour of the month, not everything that we do is transformationable, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. Just on my personal comments on some of that. When we originally envisaged the Transformation Fund, when that was originally put forward, we did have quite a strong payback element of this based on a 5-to-1 ratio, but we quickly discovered, and with the support of opposition groups such as your own, we quickly discovered that that was not entirely the best use of the fund, that there are times when outcomes are improved or service delivery is improved or it's benefit the people, but it is transformational, that may not have a directly recognisable payback in the early years, or it may be unmeasurable. But we did agree entirely, almost unanimously, to move it from a purely 5-to-1 payback thing into more of a, if it's for transformation, it makes sense for our residents, we will proceed. And I think in this particular case, you said there might be some things that aren't transformational. This really is very much that think communities approach, being spread out. We've piloted it, we've tried to encourage it, and it is a different way of working. So I'm very much supportive of this, and I understand that a lot of the finances may not be as measurable as we would like, but it will, you know, I have a lot of confidence in this, and just wanted to clear up that point.
If I could just come back, point of personal explanation, Chair. You said I said that this wasn't transformational. I didn't say that because I think it can be. I said it wasn't transformationable in that it doesn't fit easily into a transformation bid process. That's what I said.
Yeah, you said later on in your speech, you said that not all of the bids that go for the fund are transformation. I said this one is a transformation fund bid. Okay. Councillor David Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. Adrian had said that the purpose of this change was not to usurp or interfere or in any way to run down the excellent support being provided by parish councils, etc. I'd like to know explicitly how this organisation will relate to those people, rather than simply being another overhead, and how they can be a listening organisation and a supporting organisation, rather than a command and control type organisation.
Thank you, David. Adrian?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Councillor Jenkins. At the heart of this, and I think as the leader has just also mentioned in response to Councillor Dupre, this is about a fundamental change, actually, in the way that the council and its staff operates its business. And this isn't really just a piece of community development work of old that perhaps we've seen in the past in this and many other councils. This is a much more fundamental reimagining of the way that public servants in Cambridgeshire, and particularly council officers, interact with residents first and foremost, really understand how those residents, what opportunities those residents want or need in their areas. It is about understanding what's already out there. It is not about duplicating. And I think the best example is the strength of the relationship that we've, I think, already got, but will no doubt further develop with our parish and town councils. I think during the pandemic, we've seen our relationship with the two key organisations that support parish and town councils, the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Association of Local Councils and Cambridgeshire ACRE, really come to the fore of rethinking how we can work with parishes as equal partners and as enablers, not as you describe, Councillor Jenkins, or inferred that we may end up being this in any way as a command and control type organisation. This is about resetting those relationships and really understanding what makes those relationships work. And on the basis that the most local we can make an intervention, the more likely we are to see that intervention make the biggest difference. And that's been proven through Neighbourhood Cares, it's been proven through some of the pilot work we did with Think Communities, and it's been definitely proven time and time again during the pandemic. And the only way we can make things local as a county council is to work in a very different way with communities, with residents, but also with those structures, the first tier of local government in particular, in parish and town councils, that can make those things work on the ground. So, you know, I would expect you to ask me to come back and hold me to account on this, and the proof of the pudding is in the eating. But this has the support from an officer perspective of all of the directorates, that such is the breadth and significance of the work. Our HR colleagues recognise, for example, that our workforce may need to be retrained, if you like, in the way that they think about public service delivery. Our Place and Economy Director is thinking about the role of highways officers in supporting this kind of work via community organisations. So this is a root and branch rethinking of the way the county council and its officers work with citizens fundamentally.
If I may come back on that quickly, Chair. Yes, of course. But you didn't exactly answer my question of how exactly will it relate to parish councils, etc. And I was slightly concerned when you talked about this will enable the county council to have better relationships with people in the communities, which sort of said, get out of the way, parish councils, we're going to talk to your residents directly. For example, is one of those coordinators going to be named and be the prime contact for an individual in any parish council? Yeah. And how will they engage with the parish council's ongoing activity rather than just appearing occasionally and then disappearing? It's really important.
Sorry, Councillor, to interrupt. So absolutely, a very firm yes to the final point you're making. There's no point having officers who are place-based, people-centred staff, not known and working very, very closely with parish and town councils. So those details will absolutely be shared. It's important to reference other important pieces of work this council is committed to, including the spokes element of CAMS 2020, which, as you'll know, is all about moving staff into communities. And I would expect these community connectors to always be located within the communities that they're there to support. And it's probably my clumsy use of the term community in relation to the first point, because community for me is a generic term. I wasn't necessarily talking about citizens and a direct relationship between the county and citizens. I was talking more about what makes up the community, of which, of course, citizens are a big part, a huge part, but so are parish and town councils, so are voluntary and community sector organisations, so are faith groups, and many, many other public sector partners, as well as private business. In the spirit of economic recovery, that business relationship is more important than ever. So apologies if my wording was slightly clumsy. I was very much talking about the relationship we have with communities and all their components that is at the very heart of what we're trying to achieve here.
Okay, thank you, Adrian.
Chair, I have my COVID question. Do you want me to put that now or come back to it later?
No, please go ahead. You have the floor, David.
Okay, thank you. As we all know and are aware, Cambridgeshire has a relatively low infection rate of COVID, significantly below the national average and well below the intervention rate, which is causing action in the northwest and the northeast and Birmingham. If it can be kept at that level, and as long as we don't get into national lockdown situations, we would be able to avoid a regional lockdown, which would be good for our economy and good for the mental health of our people. The biggest driver to us losing that position of a low infection territory, I would guess, is the arrival of students at Cambridge University and Anglia Ruskin in the next weeks, etc. What is being done to mitigate the impact of that development on the infection rate, and how are we coordinating with the university authorities in order to make sure that we can control what's important for the universities and important for the county at large?
Okay, thank you very much, David. I see the hand's gone up from our Chief Executive, Gillian Beasley, so I can only assume that's to come in on this question. Is that correct, Gillian?
Yes, and thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Jenkins, for that question. So for some time, there has been detailed planning that's taken place under the Local Outbreak Control Plan, which is led by Dr. Liz Robin, with both the Cambridge University and Anglia Ruskin, and with Cambridge City Council around the return of students. So there's a detailed plan that's been worked up around that, and all aspects are covered in relation to that. So that plan now is in place and will be operated under the auspices and guidance of our Director of Public Health. It involves, as you can imagine, quite a number of components to it, but we've had to work on it, as you can imagine, for some time because of the challenges it presents. We have had some government guidance in relation to the return of students to university settings, which have been applied to the action plan that has been developed by the Director of Public Health with Cambridge City Council and with the universities. And more than happy to share more details of that. But I would imagine that the Health Committee and Dr. Robin will be reporting on that plan, as is her responsibilities to that committee. But just to reassure you, there is a detailed plan. It's been worked at for some time and is being led by our Director of Public Health. Thank you.
Chair, thanks for the offer of sharing more detail from the Chief Executive. I would appreciate that. And question, I would imagine that given the experience that is now happening at other university towns, are these plans being tightened up, and are we learning from that such that we really can avoid a second lockdown locally?
I think, Chairman, if I could answer that, I think one of the strengths of the work that our sector has done and local government has done is have shared experiences and learning. And I know that Dr. Robin and colleagues from universities are in touch with each other, because what we have created is a network of learning and understanding across the country, and that will be applied to the particular plan. So, and I think that's a strength of our sector is that ability. So I know for certain that we've looked at not only the government guidance, but what others are doing to make sure our plans are secure. And it isn't just a matter of the plans, it is a matter of the kind of review of the situation day in, day out, which our Director of Public Health does through a surveillance cell that she's set up, where we're looking at the epidemiology day in and day out. So that will also be applied, that rigour will be applied to this situation too.
Thank you. That's a smashing answer, and thank you. And may I ask how you're going to be sharing these details with us that you kindly offered?
Yeah, I will talk to the Director of Public Health, but as I said, the oversight of this, I think, will be in Health Committee, and Councillor Hudson indicating that. But I'll talk to the Director of Public Health, and we'll get a briefing out to you of the situation to keep you up to speed as we stand now. But the monitoring of that will be with Health Committee.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Jenkins. As well as that, I'd just like to reflect that this is the Strategic Overview Committee. And if you want to get into the fine depths of the detail, you have both the Health Committee, but also you have the Member Engagement Outbreak Board, chaired by Councillor Roger Hickford, and the Health Committee chaired by Councillor Peter Hudson. And I'm sure that they'll willingly take on any questions of detail that you wish to get into. Thank you, Councillor Jenkins. I've now got Councillor Anna Bailey.
Forum in which I meet both you and the Chief Executive, Chair.
Sorry?
This is the one forum where I meet both you and the Chief Executive.
So yes, you do. Yes, you do, Councillor Jenkins. I'm just wondering that sometimes, because we are a strategic committee, that if you want to get into the fine details so much, perhaps those people right at the coalface, should we say, have more detail and can give you much fuller answers to your inquiries rather than the strategic overview that we have on this committee. But, you know, I'm always happy to take your questions and give you what answers we can on the spur of the moment and furnish further details later on. But as I said, there are other avenues as well for granular detail. Thank you, David. Councillor Anna Bailey.
Very much, Chairman. I'd just like to speak to the transformation bid, and I don't suppose it's going to come as any surprise to the committee to hear that I'm in full support of it and incredibly excited to see it coming here. You know, I think that I sense a huge commitment in our communities to continue the good work. You know, the goodwill and the willingness to commit resources by people just has not gone away. In the way that you might have expected when people have got a lot on their minds and a lot of other competing interests and a lot of concerns and jobs and all the rest of it. It really is still there, and people want to be involved and want to support each other. And we know through Neighbourhood Cares that we do need resources, you know, deployed at a local level to, you know, muster people together and to get things going and to help facilitate. And it is very much about standing alongside communities at a local level. It's not doing things to them. It's about, you know, garnering that goodwill that is out there and getting things going. And it's about mustering together all of those resources that are in our communities and getting all of that together. And I think this is about sort of turbocharging work that we've been trying to do for a long time and we know has paid dividends. So those strengths-based conversations that our social workers and our support planners have been having with people for some time now, we know that pays dividends in improved outcomes for people, helping people to maintain their independence, helping people not to need a social care package, which after all, most people do not want a social care package. They don't want to have to need a social care package, and anything we can do to help them retain their independence. And we know that those strengths-based conversations work. And to me, this is about turbocharging all of that prevention activity by mustering all of the resources that we have in communities and helping that to happen. And we know that our Neighbourhood Cares workers were really, really effective in doing that, standing alongside communities, supporting, making things happen, making buildings available, putting small amounts of money at people's, you know, into projects that people wanted to do and helping facilitate that activity. And that's what this is about to me. I think this represents a huge, well, it's a £1.7 million commitment at the moment, but ultimately it's a commitment and a belief in the power of our communities to support themselves. That's what this is about. And I think it's a huge commitment and shift to prevention. And it's a belief that prevention works. And we know it does, you know, inherently we know it does, you know, we feel that it does, but we have shown that it does through Neighbourhood Cares. And not all of those savings belong to the county council. And, you know, it's fantastic that we're able to get past that and recognise, this is about recognising that, you know, people in our communities, our residents, they don't care who's involved and who anybody works for. They just want things to work, and they want the system to work, and they want things to be easy. They don't want lots of bureaucracy. They want things to be made easy to do, and that's what this is about. I think it's very important to prioritise our focus on the areas of greatest need, and I know absolutely that's what Adrian and Steve Criswell are utterly focused on. And, you know, we've got an opportunity to make the biggest difference in the areas that have the biggest levels of need. So I think that's important. I do also think that the NHS narrative is very important. It is in there. The word health is in the transformation bid, but I'm not yet feeling or seeing. So I sit on the STP board, where there is a lot of good talk and a lot of the right noises. You know, the North and South alliances have been incredibly effective, actually. They are very pragmatic, get sleeves rolled up type of people who've run a number of small projects that have not actually cost the NHS anything to do. It's just been about getting the right people in a room together, saying, right, let's do this, and just getting on and doing it. And it's been very, very effective at a small, often very local level. But what the STP admits it's not great at doing, it's having all the right conversations, and it's yet to move into proper delivery. But the focus really is on that at STP level now. And what I would love to see is in all the narrative and the documents, we absolutely have to see the NHS and our proposals alongside our districts and our parishes and our communities really coming together. And I want to see that flavour coming through the STP papers and all the NHS papers, as well as our own. And finally, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Adrian and Steve Criswell and all of your colleagues who have put this bid together. I think it's incredibly exciting. It's absolutely the way to go. I truly believe in it. East Cambs District Council is massively behind this and excited and raring to go. It's done prevention work in its housing team for a long time, and let them loose because they're ready to go. So thank you ever so much, and very excited to see this happening.
Thank you, Anna. Councillor Tom Sanderson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a very good document and a very good idea. So well done to Adrian and to Councillor Criswell for their work on this. I think my question was preempted by the answers that Adrian gave to Councillor Jenkins earlier about how we involve town and parish councils. And I'm just wondering where we'd sort of physically locate a lot of this work around the county. And I'm sure Adrian knows what I'm getting at here. I can think of one particular parish town council that might be able to play a significant role, which we'll be discussing next week. So I wondered if you could just sort of give a feel of whereabouts we'd be locating some of the community coordinators. And I think Councillor Bailey was correct. This is about prevention. I think one of the problems we have, certainly district councils have, is people are not always sure how to approach, how to sort of communicate their problem. And often it gets to the point where it's got to sort of an extreme where it's very difficult to try and unwind the situation. And I think if we can be more preventative, I think that'll have a great benefit to our local communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Thanks, Chairman. If I may, very briefly, just to I'll give you a fairly non-committal answer, actually, in terms of location at this stage, because the whole premise, and as we've been hearing from others here, is that it's important that we are driven by the evidence, we're driven by where the demand is, and we've built up an incredibly good picture of that over the last 2 or 3 years, but we know we need to do more work still to crunch the data and really truly understand where areas of greatest concern are. What I will say, though, is that there are some really very obvious places that need some immediate support and intervention. I think the area that you were describing is one such area, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation that's taking place next week. I've got some great hopes there. A number of other areas of the county that have traditionally had more county council support and intervention perhaps in the north. But this is about making sure that all parts of our county and every resident can benefit from this approach. So lots of communities have come forward through the £5 million community capital fund project, very small communities that are otherwise relatively isolated, but now benefiting from some investment from that fund that will lead to, with some support if required, some breaking down of access to service barriers, opportunities that aren't there currently, removal of isolation. So it's really important that this touches all parts of our county. In terms of physical location, we'll absolutely want and expect and mandate the officers to be located within the communities that they're working alongside. So, and that's why I mentioned the Spokes project earlier, but also, and as we've been doing through the pandemic, sharing office space and community spaces with others as pragmatic and as required, really, is what I would expect to see continue going forward.
Thank you, Adrian. Councillor Noel Kavanagh.
Yes, this looks like a really excellent initiative. But as we're talking, and I was looking at the, there's the 8 priorities in the illustration there, and I was looking at priority 6, obviously, tackling food and fuel poverty and security, which is very critical at the moment. And without sounding alarmist or anything, I was just thinking that this kind of jigsaw could become very unbalanced quite soon if, and it goes back to what was mentioned earlier on about the central government's decisions. I mean, I think we're on the cusp of waiting for central government to make a decision about rents, because as we are aware, during the pandemic, huge numbers of people have been unemployed or earning much less than they normally do. So they've been unable to pay their rents. And fortunately, the government, I think, brought in a ruling saying that there was to be a kind of holiday so that people would not be evicted for not paying the rent. But I believe we're waiting on a decision now from central government about whether or not landlords will now be able to begin to evict people from their homes for not paying rent. And in many cases, huge number of cases, it's not through their own fault at all. And I was just wondering, in the light of that, with this initiative, which is wonderful, the way it all fits together, all the different needs and priority areas, whereas priority 6 could quite soon, because of the needs of these people who could be evicted, could really swallow up all the resources that are being put into the transformation initiative. So I just thought I'd raise that and see what people thought about that.
Chairman, if I might
use a term, to use a term, it's almost like going to be like a turbocharge assault on the scheme if the government makes the decision not to continue to support people who are unable to pay their rent through no fault of their own.
Adrian.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks, Councillor Kavanagh. Yeah, absolutely. Priority 6 is probably notable in that it's the most specific of all of the 8 in terms of it being quite granular. And that's for very much the reasons that you've articulated. We don't yet know what we don't know in terms of the full impact economically as well as socially on households. And I mentioned in my introduction that we know of many households that were just getting by before, and we know now are going to really struggle, and that's without the potential threat of losing one's home, the most important thing in life, shelter. Let's get that right before we can build on anything else. So we specifically have included that as an objective, but it's important that it's seen in the context of the other 7, in particularly priority 7 itself, improving social mobility. We have a newly relaunched cross-party working group chaired by Councillor Criswell and accountable to the Communities and Partnerships Committee, which is focusing on all aspects of social mobility and tackling poverty and multiple deprivation long term, particularly. And priority 6 is about making sure that the short-term impacts of the pandemic on things like food and fuel, keeping your home warm, keeping food on the table, are also mitigated. And it's important, I think, that to stress that priority 6 is a great example of Think Communities in practice, because there's already a huge amount of work being done with district council partners, parish and town councils, lots of community and faith organisations in this space, looking at the short-term opportunities to provide a sustainable food for people that might otherwise go without, but to put that in the context of a food strategy that develops local food producers and supports the local economy, and then builds up to a longer-term set of solutions which enable people to afford to put food on the table themselves through better paid employment, for example. So there is already a lot of work going on in this space. The agreement the committee's already made to allocate the £541,000 local emergency assistance scheme funding, the vast majority of that funding is being used to further that work in the short term, and will be ready and alongside housing authority partners and others should we see an increase in any eviction action taken by landlords once we know ourselves what the lie of the land actually is.
Thank you, Adrian. And also for the benefit of the committee, there are various schemes in place. So for example, the County Council and the District Council has mostly signed up to the Housing First scheme, but the government has done a lot in terms of supporting people that are either through furlough and the furlough payments. There's a universal credit. There's recently introduced the £500 if you ask to, up to £500 a week if you ask to self-isolate, and qualifications for that. And I urge you, Noel Kavanagh, you said if people are evicted for no fault of their own, and we're talking about the only considerations here would be people that are substantially behind in their rent. So for some reason, they are either not accessing those universal credits or other support, or they're not using them for the rent. But I'd urge you, if you know of individual cases, to get in contact with the appropriate bodies at the earliest possible opportunity, because everybody in the system will work hard to avoid that homelessness, which the government is also supporting if that is available at all. So just making you aware of that. Thank you. Councillor Machine, please.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I should probably add my voice to the chorus of thanking Adrian for all the hard work he does on the committee. This is another splendid example of the wonderful work he produces, and it's fabulous, and it's really good that it's coming. I kind of understand some of the points that Lorna raised in terms of perhaps we hope that this is not, that the Transformation Fund bid is not the end, but the beginning of something that we want to see embedded, because, we're going to have this in the long term, I suspect. We said in March, this isn't a sprint, it's a marathon, and it's not even going to be a marathon, it's going to be a very slow walk, I suspect, and it's going to carry on for a very long time. So I hope that, these structural changes that we're making are sustainable, are permanent. We very, very much need that. And I was going to note something that the report hints at, and I think this is very important because it came up at committee before, and this is that some of the investment we put in and some of the packages we put in and the resources we put in, we're going to have to start thinking a bit more carefully about what constitutes a demonstrable saving to the council, because I suspect that in the past we've taken an approach that hasn't quite been perhaps holistic enough. There was a lot of stuff that you would say, yeah, this is very, I'm thinking about the 4 years I spent on the Innovate and Cultivate panel where you came up with proposals. I know that that's not what we're talking about, it's a completely different kettle of fish, but it's the thinking that's important, because you came up against a lot of really important things and you were like, yeah, this would be fantastic, this would totally help the neediest, but we can't give it because we can't demonstrate the saving. I don't want us to be taking that approach literally anywhere else, because it's not going to help us. I mean, homelessness is a very important example that my colleague has raised, and you can't just say, yes, it would be good to house a number more people, but we're not quite sure exactly what savings we're going to make if we do that. We're going to have to apply our thinking a bit more differently there, and I hope that this is the beginning of that. And I look forward to seeing how this embeds itself. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Machini. Just to reassure you that the aims of this isn't to be a temporary band-aid whilst we deal with the pandemic. This is the direction of travel being turbocharged, as somebody put it, that we've been on a journey for a little while of working better with our communities in order to help with all the services that we deliver, the NHS deliver, and our districts deliver. So it's really about working with the communities a lot more to help them help themselves. And it is designed to be a permanently embedded feature and not just a stopgap measure for the pandemic. So very much in line with your thinking on that, Eliza. I've got Councillor Lorna Dupre, please.
Sorry, I just wanted to let you know that Councillor Netzinger has let us know that she's got problems with her broadband, so that's probably why she appears to have dropped out of the meeting. I don't know whether she'll make it back in.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dupre. I've got no more hands indicating to speak on any of the aspects of this paper, in which case I'd like to make a few comments of my own. It's very refreshing to see today the perhaps the non-political way that we've handled this paper, and the way that we've come together and supported this, plus many of the other things during the pandemic. And it's quite a change to some of the other things that have happened in the past, that perhaps some of the Conservative proposals have had what I would call an unwarranted rocky ride, or maybe complete opposition to, unlike this one and perhaps the Conservative proposal on the green agenda, where we've had almost universal support. But I just want to touch on a few of those things that directly relate to our overall position during the pandemic, and quite a lot of them directly relate to Adrian Chapman's paper today, and the position that Cambridgeshire County Council has put under various administrations in the recent past to get us to the position we are. One of the first ones I'll mention is the direction of travel with the neighbourhood cares that was introduced and pushed forward by Councillor Anna Bailey. And that really identified the way forward, that you could say, using a build-up of anecdotal and direct financial information, that the prevention agenda from the County Council is something worth sticking to and really building on, which this paper alludes to. And the investment that went into the 2 pilots for that area. And that's been taken forward very much into the other aspects of the council through the communities committee that was created with some opposition, I would say, the committee with the partnership committee chaired by Steve Criswell, and the Think Communities work that has really led to this and was instrumental in seeing us through the worst of the pandemic. I don't think if we'd got to that point and that direction at the stage we had before the pandemic had arrived, we would have been able to put ourselves in as good a position as we did at that point in time. And my thanks also go to community champions that are a part of that committee that have also been very useful in the areas that they operate. Some of the investments that have gone in the past, and people talk a lot about savings and efficiencies, but we forget sometimes just the sheer amount of investment that we make when we believe in things. And Councillor Eliza Machini referred to one of them, which was the Innovate and Cultivate Fund, which we invested £1 million in and then refreshed that a year later, which helped right at the parish and town level to help with our aspirations for the building of the communities. And it doesn't stop there, because last year, of course, we introduced the £5 million community fund, which has been snatched up very readily by the communities to help build those communities, the things that they want to do in their communities, and perhaps some of those smaller or isolated ones, which they were unable to do in the past. And that really helped bring us together. The investment today that we're talking about of £1.686 million is only available because we as an organisation created a transformation fund and have been using that regularly for different ways to invest throughout our county in new ways of working, that we're actually been driving towards this community thing, community way of working for quite a long while now. And this is a further enhancement of that work. And I'm also going to touch on a non-community based thing that has really helped us with those people that had to work at home. And I don't know what's happened to Councillor Netzinger's broadband, but you know, we put in £20 million underneath Councillor Nick Clark was the leader at the time into the broadband super vast provision. We reinvested another £7 million, almost £7 million years later, under Councillor Ian Bates, that took us to about 97% super fast broadband coverage for Cambridgeshire. It's now under GPC, our remit, we're at 98%, and we're driving towards 99% super fast broadband coverage. And that has really made a difference for the businesses and the individuals of Cambridgeshire and their ability to work from home in a lot of cases that in other counties is simply beyond the technological capability of a rural county. So with all of that going together, I'm really quite pleased at the way, fortuitously in many cases, or was it, it certainly wasn't crystal ball gazing, but the position that Cambridgeshire was in at the start of this pandemic, and perhaps that's helped us deal with some of the worst excesses of trying to cope with this. I see this paper, particularly, I'm referring Adrian Chapman, Steve Criswell's paper, request for finance here from the investment fund, as a further enhancement of our community work and something to be endorsed and praised. And I think that we will see it bear fruits, both financially, but also in terms of outcomes for our residents, improving their lives in ways that weren't really possible by direct allocations of money for a quarter-hour appointment to take some pills or something like that. This is a real difference in the way that we're thinking about how we work with communities to help themselves. So I'm very much in favour. As we had nobody speak against any of the recommendations, I propose to take all of the recommendations en bloc unless I see a raised hand. So I'm taking them as an affirmative unanimous vote. If I see a raised hand, I'll stop and then ask the councillor which ones they want to take separately that they may not wish to support. So I'm moving to the vote now. If I see no blue hands, I will take it as unanimous in support. Okay, no blue hands have been raised, so we can consider all of those recommendations passed unanimously. Thank you very much, and well done to the entire team and our workforce. Moving back to the agenda now, I'm going to move on to agenda item number 5, the General Purposes Committee Agenda Plan, Training Plan, appointments to outside bodies, groups and panels. Can I ask the Democratic Services Manager, Michelle Rowell, to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say in relation to your October meeting that there are additional items. Business planning should be on there in relation to both revenue and capital. And also there's a transformation bid for a micro enterprise pilot. And in relation to appointments on the member development panel, Councillor Whitehead has been replaced by Councillor Machini, with Councillor Kavanagh substituting.
Okay, thank you, Misha. Can I also ask the Director of Business Development, Improvement and Development to provide an update on the item in the action log relating to training? I think it was 258.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. The action was discussed in June, and it was particularly in response to the new remit on economic recovery for this committee. And as committee members will be aware from previous updates on recovery work, economic recovery is one of our 6 recovery topics in our framework. So although we've heard throughout this meeting, we're still deep in response to the pandemic, we're also continuing to work on those recovery topics in tandem. The Recovery Board meets monthly, and I'll be bringing a proposal to the next committee meeting for a training workshop, which covers a lot of those recovery themes, including the economic recovery strategy. We'll probably start that workshop with looking at the impact on individuals and families, particularly around the economic impact, and then identify from that the training that this committee wants to receive on the economy and our role as the County Council. So currently I'm proposing that that workshop should take place in November, but we'll have to just keep an eye on the review of the current context and our response plans and what suits this committee. So I'll be bringing a proposal in October and a date for a November workshop on the 6 recovery topics, including economic recovery.
Okay, thank you very much, Amanda.
Thank you.
Would any members of the committee wishing to ask a question or make a comment, please use the raised hand function at the right of your screen. I'm not seeing anything, so we're going to move to a vote to, I've got Lorna waving, but not.
My blue hand was up, Chair. Put it up while Amanda was speaking.
Apologies. I know what's happened, Councillor Dupre. If I move down the screen at all, it disappears off the top, and it has done. So my apologies, Councillor Dupre, please go ahead.
Thank you. I understand the comments that Amanda has made and which are very helpful. However, I'm struggling to align them with the report we have in front of us and to understand the purpose of having reports back at this meeting on a training plan on attendance at 2 events which happened 3 years ago. I'm not at all clear what that report is intended to tell us, or why the action log said that this was going to be resolved at the September meeting, where in fact we're being told it's October. But the key point is, what is the purpose of reports about 3-year-old training? And how does that fit with what Amanda has just told us?
Okay, Amanda?
Yeah, so I think the Michelle might want to come in on this, but I think the committee training plan is just a log of the things that the committee has done to date. So those are the last 2 training events that this committee did, and my item is to propose the next one in November.
Thank you, Chair. That's clear. I just now that Amanda has explained it, I just wonder whether it's sensible to take that amount of paper in an agenda to talk about items that were well and truly over and dusted, and how long we go back in this process. I mean, will we carry these forward on the training log to the end of time?
No, so I think, if I may, that what you were given was an example of the training log going back what's happened in the past, and perhaps we consider what ground we've already covered and whether we should be refreshing that. But the specific action that was asked of Amanda Askham was to consider what training should be made available, given that economic activity was a new responsibility for the committee. And I think that Amanda's asked that. This is just additional information you've been given on this one occasion. Does that help, Lorna?
It sort of helps, but in that case, I think that the title of the item is wrong. It's not a plan if it's just if it's a report on what has happened in the past. And I think officers may wish to review how helpful that information is to us going forward.
That was a report on what happened in the past. The plan that Amanda introduced is what we're going to be doing in November. Okay. If I'm seeing no other hands indicating whether to speak or not, so I'm going to move to the vote, which involves a movement and the appointments to committees, additional items on the agenda for the next meeting, and also for the plan that Amanda's introduced for further training. Have I got any other hands? I will take this on block as an affirmative if I'm not seeing any other hands. I've got no hands raised, so we'll take that as unanimous. Thank you very much. Right, I do believe we're at the end of the meeting, in which case I thank you all for your time this morning and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Chairman.